Time.
I hope you can hear me. Yeah, okay, I can hear myself as well. Okay, good. So thanks everyone for coming to this panel, and it's a pleasure for me to be part of this event. And today we have the panel that we will have now is about ensuring sustainable and resilient infrastructure investment. And we should be here for around 1 hour. And I'll have my phone here just to measure the time. So the idea is we have two rapporteurs, so-called rapporteurs from the civil society, Marko Sošić and Ardian Hackaj. I'll briefly introduce them in a second, who will present the main recommendations from the working groups that have been gathered here. And they will speak slightly more about that. And they should be very brief about that, maybe 10 minutes or something. And after that, we have 3 commentators, which are unfortunately not here in person, but we have them over the internet, online. So we have first Jovana Marović. I'll introduce them, everybody, in a second. Then Naim and Nedim Begovic. And so the idea is that they will comment briefly, each of them around 5 minutes, on what the rapporteurs have said, or maybe something in addition to that they can say from their point of view. And after that, we have a fishbowl format, which means that the people who are here present in the audience are encouraged to ask questions or comment or whatever, say something, speak about the topic that we have here. And the fishbowl format means that you're not asking the question from there, but you're joining the panel here and you're talking, you're becoming part of the panel, and you're talking with all of us, so you're equal to all of us. But the idea is also that you don't occupy the panel, but you just go here for 5-10 minutes until you ask your question, give your comment, and we have a reflection. And after that, you leave so that someone else joins the panel. I know that it might not work. Let's see how it works. I encourage you to join to the panel. If you really don't want to join, you can also ask the question from the podium. But also, in order to encourage you to join to the panel, I promise that I will buy a beer to everybody who comes here. So that's kind of, I'm an economist, so I like incentives.
They are for free, offered by the...
Really?
I think so.
You didn't have to tell this, come on. Okay, yeah, so that's the idea. You have fishbowls to ask questions, and if you're shy to ask questions, I have plenty of questions in my folder. So yeah, that's the idea of this panel. So let's start now with a brief introduction of everybody about, who is present on this panel. So my name is Branimir Jovanović. I'm an economist. I'm an economic researcher at the Vienna Institute for International Economic Studies, but I'm originally from the Balkans. I'm originally from North Macedonia, but I've been living in Vienna for 2 years, and I'm an economic researcher. So I will speak about these things from a macroeconomic point of view, first and foremost. Then we have Marko Sošić, who is a researcher he comes from Montenegro, from Podgorica, from the Alternativa Institute, and his area of expertise, I don't want to go into too much details, but his area of expertise is briefly public financial management. So yes, he's mainly an expert in public finances, but he will speak about infrastructure investment from a public financial point of view. And then we have Ardian Hackaj, who is a director of the, let me read the exact name, Cooperation and Development Institute in Tirana, but also a research director of the Tirana Connectivity Forum. So it's a forum which takes place in Tirana, and it's about connectivity. So his area of expertise is mainly EU accession, but also lately, I think, connectivity issues. I also don't want to spend too much time on people's CVs. Then we have Jovana Marović, who is over the internet, who is the Deputy Prime Minister of Montenegro, and also the Minister of EU Affairs. And before coming to this position, she was working at various government positions, but also non-government positions. So she has a very interesting portfolio, let's say CV, working both for the government and for the non-government sector. Hello, Jovana. And then we have Naim, who comes from the IFC, or International Finance Organization, which is the private sector arm of the World Bank Group. So basically, he's the director, the regional manager for Central and Southeast Europe. And IFC, if I'm not wrong, has a portfolio of around 2 billion euros of investment in the whole region. And it's mostly a private investment, so they're kind of encouraging private investment. So he can speak more about this. Hello, Ari. And then we have, last but not least, Nedim Begovic, who comes from another or international organization, which is called the Transport Community, and it's located in Belgrade. And he is, they're working on transport issues in the region, but he's the person who is responsible for the transport aspects or part of the green agenda, which is going on, which his organization is kind of working on. So hello, Nedim. And without further ado, now we go to the panelists, and we start with Marko. So Marko, your 5 minutes about the main recommendations you have for this question of how to ensure sustainable but also resilient infrastructure investment in the region. And I will try to notify you when you're out of time by raising this poll.
Okay. So I will not try to. I feel like I'm turning my back to my deputy prime minister, which is
but
never,
you can see
never a good idea, especially Jovana. I'm not going to read the recommendations. I'm just going to try to explain what we talked about in our group and what was the whole topic about. So we are talking about infrastructure investment, and from our point of view, from the point of view of civil society in the region, and trying to see how we can be more involved in this topic, both at the national level and also at this emerging and very important level for all of our countries, which is related to the Western Balkans investment framework, where all of our countries apply for projects, and this represents a kind of a separate project pipeline that we have. Why is this important for us? We think that the space for CSO's involvement in policy making is not big in the Western Balkans, but it's kind of the least developed in the area of budget, and even less so in the area of budget for public infrastructure planning. And we, in our group, discussed what are the main obstacles for greater civil society involvement in this sense. And the first one was the lack of data. So lack of data overall, this is the precondition for a meaningful participation in order for us to be on equal footing with all the stakeholders, both governmental and those coming from the EU, is that we all kind of have the same data in our hands. This is the capital budget or public infrastructure budget in all of our countries is one of the most obscure parts of it. It is basically not so large, for example, for the national level. In the countries of the region, it's from 10 to 20% of the budget, but taken as a whole, as an expense, it's probably one of the most important expenses in the national budgets that we have, because it's not mandatory, such as salaries or pensions or social transfers. It is completely discretionary. The governments can plan how many projects they can implement in a year, and they can allocate as much funds as they can or as they want. And it is often used as a sort of a political bargaining place. It is often used as a place of promises, not of delivering on commitments. For example, in Montenegro, I would say a populist move of then government, not on which Jovana was not a part of, but last year she was not there. But they, for example, used the opportunity to promise more than 350 new projects in the capital budget of Montenegro to its citizens. However, now we see that over 250 of those projects are so immature that they cannot even be moved from the ground. Nothing can be done. They were just used at a certain political moment as a promise, but without any hope of delivering. So in all of our countries, we think that this should be an issue that's more on the public agenda. How the governments plan, select capital projects, major public infrastructure projects, with these limited funds that they have, both at their national disposal and also at the disposal of, for example, WBIF, is a matter of huge concern. Right now, from what we see from the work analytical work that organizations are doing, and that, for example, IMF is doing, it boils down to the fact that the governments do not have proper methodologies for selecting these projects, that when they are selected, the whole procedure for proper planning is not there, and then that leads to problems in execution, in the implementation of these projects. which then leads to the fact that most of them don't see light of day, or they are dragged on year from year with extended deadlines, extended budgets, and so on and so on. So we think that this issue needs to be more on the EU's agenda when it is in the enlargement strategy. It cannot only be a footnote in the European Commission reports, as it is right now. Not a lot of attention is paid to it, and how do we reform this important sector of policymaking? And then, on the top of it, how well are the citizens, mostly through CSOs, included in the process of planning? This is perhaps the best chance for making a transition to a sort of participatory budgeting, where the citizens actually have a say on what is being built, in which projects do we invest most of our efforts. Right now, there is absolutely no inclusion. I don't even think that the citizens know when their countries are applying with projects to, for example, WBIF. And then when these projects are selected, they don't have a lot of information on what happens with them, with the stages, when can they expect outputs, but maybe I've overreached my time. Ardian will cover the rest. Yeah.
Thanks, Marko. Excellent introduction and an excellent summary of your main recommendations. Great. Ardian, let's come back to you now. So what are your thoughts about the whole process and maybe what Marko said?
Thank you. Well, I'd like to start by saying to everybody, sharing with everybody, that we decided with Marko to be the happy panel, in the sense that there was enough gloom and doom and whatever, complaining how powerless we are.
That was me in my happy mode.
Yeah. So we said, guys, we will be the ones that we will change things, and I'm serious about this. But I'll come a little bit what was discussed about this dichotomy between rule of law and versus stability. I think it's a false debate. It has always been a false debate. The idea, their short reply is that they go together. It's a false friend. The answer lies in the solidity of the institutions, in the sense that if you go for the stability of corrupt and captured institutions, you will work with unreliable partners, right? So you will not have any certainty that your partners in this part of the continent will be by your side first, and second, will be able to be by your side when you'll need them, right? So let's better not have corrupt and incompetent institutions or governments in place, and this is why we want the rule of law. So I want to underline this. It's about good governance. It's not about rule of law. We need to be a little bit more specific. Second, about the Berlin process, it has been our baby since 2014, when Chancellor Merkel handed it to us, to the Western Balkans. It's now, I just want to say, it's about cohesion. We have been talking about enlargement for the last 10, 15, 20 years. It doesn't make any more sense to enlarge in the Western Balkans. It's counterintuitive even. We need to converge with the EU institutions according to the EU values. And to do this, we need new mechanics and new mechanisms and new allies, and this is where we come from. This is where the civil society comes from, because we are the best allies. What do we want to do? We want to participate not only during the consultations. When things are sent for us to be consulted, the deal is done, right? It doesn't make any sense. And first of all, nobody pays for being consulted. We are not even paid for the consultations that we do. So we need to participate in the draftings. We have done some very specific, I will not read it. We have adopted a can-do attitude with these recommendations. There are very specific things that make possible for specialized, I would say not everybody is interested, and rightly so, but specialized civil society organizations and think tanks that have the expertise, the technical expertise, that have the knowledge. And I don't want to hear that we don't have the expertise or the knowledge. This is not even serious to be considered with. We have it. We have produced even prime ministers and deputy prime ministers. We have ministers, so if we are good to be ministers, we're also very good to be consultants. So we have the expertise. And the other thing that we are trying to to discuss in here, which is it is a very important, let's say, I would say even mental jump. We have stopped, or we do not consider anymore advising our politicians. It doesn't make sense for me to advise my prime minister because he will not listen to me. Why he will listen to me? I'm not elected. How many of us here are membership-based organizations? We are not elected, we do not have agency to advise our prime ministers, and we don't have entry points. If we go a degree lower to a minister or to a head of department, to people that deal with policy making, yes, we can. There are mechanisms that demand our inclusion. We have agency because we have sector expertise, and we have the knowledge. So we go from politics to policy making, and also we have some very good partners. We have some very good partners that make this possible. We have very good partners with Regional Cooperation Council. We have very good partners with Transport Permanent Secretariat. We have very good partnerships, and I think I just had a chat with Ms. von Kramon, with European Parliament. So, and we are having very good cooperation discussions with Western Balkans Investment Framework. And I will stop here.
Great, great. No, you're very good when it comes to the timing, which I appreciate a lot. Thank you very much. Very nice introduction. So now let's go to Jovana. Jovana, your reflections on what we heard so far, or maybe also something in addition to what we heard so far from your perspective. Around 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. As you said, I was involved in the civil society for 10 years, so maybe some of the issues are more familiar to me than to other government officials. So as Marko said, for example, in Montenegro, we have really developed the framework for participation of civil society, but it is least developed in the area of budget and infrastructure. But also I have to disagree with Ardian because there is lack of interest of civil society organization to monitor the infrastructure projects, and also a lack of donor support. That's also true. And since I've been in the civil society for 10 years, I really just know that Marko is following the issues, and Marko is the only one which is providing recommendations on budget, and both national and local ones. So I also agree it's important. It's really important to include the civil society in early stage and early stage of consultations when it comes to the definition of priorities and projects for applying, for example, within the European Investment Plan. It's also important to have strategic and systematic approach if we want to use in effective way funds from the European Investment Plan. And also it's important to strengthen the rule of law if we want to have better negotiating capacity, and also better capacity to apply and to apply for and to implement the EU funds. In that sense, I think that it's also important to have civil society in all these areas, which might be for this discussion not that much interesting, but that they are really relevant for chapters 23 and 24. The other thing is that, of course, as you already said, it's not just about the definition of priorities and projects for applying and for funds. It's also important to have civil society in the committees and also during the monitoring stages and phases. Maybe it would be good to develop model within the Berlin process, kind of networking and exchange of information between the civil society which are dealing with these issues in the Western Balkans in general. And also there are all, when it comes to EU funds and with all complicated procedures, there are also strict deadlines for applying for the EU funds. For example, for the next year, the EU is reprogramming the funds for the energy crisis. So we had really short deadlines in that sense, and we are now also redefining priorities for the next year. So there are always some changes in that timeline, and also for the inclusion of the civil society. So the early stage and consultation with the civil society, the monitoring stage, but also in terms of technical capacity and providing technical assistance. I think that there is also need for mapping donor support in order to have this better support of the civil society in the Western Balkans. So I agree with all the recommendations. Hopefully I have better sensitivity for the civil society inclusion. So we are open for all the recommendations. And I think that there is also need for kind of database, even at the local level for each municipality, and to receive on regular basis these suggestions for the civil society. So if there are short deadlines, to use that database for definition of the project priorities. Thank you.
Excellent, Jovana, very good timing again, so thank you very much for that. Let's go to Ari now. So Ari, I forgot to mention that you are also, before joining the IFC, where you have been for the last 20 years or something. Before that, you were also in a private banks. So what's your take on these things, especially from this perspective of IFC and also private banking?
Well, thank you very much, Branimir. Needless to say, IFC, it is very clear to us that the civil society is indispensable in building sustainability, resilience, and impact in all of our investments. So we've done a lot of work with CSOs globally and at the local level, wherever we invest, to build trust and to build partnerships in the development of this project. So if you allow me, I will make a few points more general on infrastructure in the Western Balkans, because I believe this agenda is really especially critical in the region. If you want to be successful in building the sustainable, resilient, inclusive infrastructure that is much needed, the region has an opportunity, but it also risks being left behind if it does not urgently improve on the design, the financing, the implementation of these infrastructure investments. I would just recall that into 2020, this IMF study that Marko mentioned, the IMF stated that in Central, Southeast, and Eastern Europe, closing just 50% of the infrastructure gap with the EU 15 countries by 2030 would cost between 3 and 8% of GDP per year. And since now 2 years have passed with not much infrastructure being built, I must say, I guess it would be even more now. Another important point I want to note is infrastructure projects, we build now are for the next 40 years. And hence investing now in better design, governance, planning, is absolutely critical. So the role of the CSO there and the recommendations that you are putting forward, seems absolutely essential. Especially, and I think governments a bit do not always see that, we are at a time of very important disruptions. Disruption in climate patterns, in technologies, and also in consumers' patterns, that we have seen with COVID, the digital, the e-mobility, etc. All these represent very much large risks for long-term investments going forward. And so, of course, IFC advocates for private engagement and public-private partnerships. But the point here is that public funding and EU funding will not be enough. Countries need to better leverage public-private partnerships to be able to attract private capital, but also to share some of these risks with best practice players, not only during project construction and then to be delivered with the project, but over the full lifetime of the operation. So that being said, it does represent a number of additional complexity in terms of planning, as you say, and design. And so forgive this long introduction, but this is to say that from IFC perspective, we very much welcome the spirit of your recommendations. Very often, the more challenging the operating environment is, the more impactful infrastructure investment can be, but also risks are higher, and they must be mitigated and managed. So what we see in the recommendations that you just mentioned, proposing a permanent and structured dialogue with civil society organizations through the project life cycle, increasing accountability of policymakers, increased focus on governance and integrity that Ardian mentioned. This is very much in line with our own views of how the region could implement a more resilient, a more sustainable, and more impactful projects. Too often, for instance, we see governments choosing what they believe is a fast-track bilateral engagement with a such or such partner versus a well-structured and more lengthy competitive process. And too often we see these fast tracks becoming actually dead ends. So it's very much also in line with our own standards, the IFC performance standards and environmental and social guidelines that we request to our clients to follow in the investment that we finance. When it comes to engaging with CSOs, very often, it is true, as you mentioned, that key structuring decisions have already been taken by government institutions in public-private partnerships. And hence, sometimes it is too late to engage with our clients when actually the engagement should be much more upstream. So also very much in line with the spirit of what you are proposing. One specific comment I would make is also for the CSO community. The CSO community is often very complex and composed of organizations with a large range of views, sometimes quite fragmented. So any thinking within civil society organizations on how best they can ensure effective alliances, but also representation, will facilitate the engagement on infrastructure with both governments and private players. So I would stop here for the sake of time and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ari. Very good timing again. So you're all very good today. I agree very much with the point that you made about the need for infrastructure investment, but I'll come back to that a bit later. Now let's go to Nedim. Nedim, what's your take? What are your two cents on all this, especially from the point of view of the transport community?
Good afternoon, everybody. So basically, from our side, we recognize that the transport is one of the main polluters, right? Just after the energy sector. And that's why last year we actually adopted a sustainable and smart mobility strategy to guide the green and digital transition here in the region for transport, in order to make our transport greener and more sustainable and definitely less polluting for all of us. And I want to say that one of the 10 flagships there is actually making mobility fair and just for all. For the social aspect and civil societies, actually we have in our transport community treaty very loudly emphasized the necessity to establish social dialogue, to establish social partnerships, to take into account social aspects. And we have been doing some stuff, but I think we can do even more. Basically, I think one of the things that we have done last year and this year is having our workshop on urban mobility with the IFIs, with the civil society, with the cities in the region, sharing ideas, what is done and what could be improved, right? Trying to connect all of these different aspects and taking everybody's opinion on board. Also, what we are now preparing is one report on people with reduced mobility and their access to the main stations here, again, including civil society. And next year, definitely, we plan to improve even this aspect, the social forum, and we plan to definitely have more panels and more inclusion of civil societies on a policy aspect, because we are primarily an organization dealing with the policy issues. And with these policy issues and having all of the opinion of the civil society on board, we can actually influence how the projects from the strategic side, then we can later on influence how the projects will be developed. I think I can just agree with what everybody else said. Having civil society there, having their opinion included, it's very important for the accountability, for transparency, and we as a transport community treaty will definitely work in the future, especially for your part of recommendations of having better and permanent and structured dialogue.
Great, thanks. Very good timing again. Okay, so now let's go after this first introductory round of addresses. Can we go to the podium and ask you, do you have any question or any comment on this issue? Anybody? Okay, think about, okay, that's good. Would you be so nice to join the panel here? Excellent. I like this very much. So yes, you have 5 minutes, please.
That is too much, probably. A little bit of realities. existing infrastructure in the Balkans is used in a range between 15 and 30% of available capacity. The thesis that there is a shortage of infrastructure is not really well justified. So the role of civil society is probably identifying available capacities that could be used, identifying the bottlenecks and the policy problems why the existing infrastructure is not used, and basically understanding that better use of existing infrastructure is 9 times better by the analysis of the World Bank, 9 times better contribution to GDP and employment than actually building a new infrastructure. I appreciate that building a new infrastructure is attractive to the governments, as Ardian described it in his speech, for a variety of reasons, but use of existing infrastructure helps. And I would recommend that we just mention existing infrastructure, ports, railways, River Danube, which is only 15% used, pipelines all around, roads, etc., etc. So there is existing infrastructure, and we have to be aware of the existence of it.
I think that's a very good remark, but you can stay maybe here for a while. Let's have maybe a brief discussion on this. I agree to some extent that there is some infrastructure, but even this infrastructure, which you mentioned, like the river or the railways, they require additional investment. You cannot use the existing railway, which goes, I don't know, from whatever, from Slovenia to Macedonia, wherever, to have high-speed trains. You must invest in order to make it, to be able to use it.
I understand your question, but tell me, what's wrong with the slow-going trains?
I mean, you cannot travel with them. That's
no,
wrong. If I have to travel from Skopje to Belgrade, if I need eight hours to travel with a train, I would never do it.
Appreciate that, but in a normal railway system, anywhere in Europe, passenger travel is just a small fraction and most often subsidized fraction of revenues. Most of this is heavy cargo. And heavy cargo doesn't need high-speed trains. You just need a reliable, working, predictable train. So there was a very good study on a train line between, for example, London and Edinburgh, where when asked about eventual high-speed train, the passenger said, no, we just need a reliable train with a good internet in it. So basically, the story here is, let's try to use what we have in the best possible way, and once we are already using it, then see what else we need. And eventually, let's try to identify the bottlenecks, why some existing infrastructure is not really used to the possible extent. So, for example, you have the largest inland waterway port in Europe. It's actually Belgrade port, which is totally unused.
Unused?
Unused.
Or unusable?
No,
use
it's perfectly usable. It was used for decades. But for a variety of reasons, policy reasons, soft reasons, it's not used. So there is a space for engagement of the civil society, discovering the policy problems, discovering the bottlenecks, pointing out, telling people that there is an opportunity to use these things, and so on and so on. So there is a big, interesting space for engagement.
Can I bring another example here?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, let's take this famous Adriatic-Ionian corridor. When we see, I mean, how much we trade with Montenegro, Albania with Montenegro, it's 1.3% of our international trade, 1.3%. So with 1.3%, we build this huge corridor, while trading 75% through the Durosport, you know, makes it evident that we need to review a little bit the allocation of our available budget, and this goes on what Alexander just said. And when I asked people in charge of planning this infrastructure, I said, guys, I mean, why do we do this whole highway? I mean, with all this money, we can build schools, hospitals, we can have more satellites. Now we'll have only 2. The guy...
Just to add
keep the satellites on mind, because it's also infrastructure, and we will have them. So the guy replied, yeah, but this is what the expert from EU told us. I know, because we need to have 3 lines on each side. And I was like, all right, okay, but okay. I mean, this is why we need. I mean, and I will quote a very knowledgeable German person with whom I have a coffee today. We need to have civil society, or let's say people, citizen representative involvement in critical junctions, in critical paths when we decide about infrastructure. We need to know better the societal choices as versus leaders' visions. Just to paraphrase a little bit, Ari, sometimes we have our leaders, which are all knowledgeable, they know everything. They will say, listen, when I was young, I used to go from here to there, let's say by train, so why not build this train? Or, I mean, I want this to be like this, why don't we? This is how a big part of infrastructure investments are done, or at least they start. We need to have a more societal choice expressed.
Okay, good. No, thanks a lot for these remarks. I agree with what you said. It's very good insight. Thank you very much for it. But I still don't think that it's a substitute for greater investment, at least in some areas. They're not mutually exclusive. You can have both. You can both try to use existing infrastructure better, but also invest more in infrastructure. And actually, my main comment on the recommendations that the civil CSOs or whatever this working group had on infrastructure here is that they don't mention greater investment in infrastructure anywhere. It's more, everything is about transparency, participation, inclusion of civil societies, better, let's say, way of organizing the processes, but nothing on more investment in infrastructure, which Ari mentioned. Ari mentioned one thing regarding to this. There are also many other data. So my first comment here would be that we really need greater investment in infrastructure, especially thinking about this energy transition or green agenda. I mean, we are all talking now about this energy crunch, energy crisis. The only way out of it is to invest in renewable energy. The Balkans have a potential for it. We've done a discussion on this in a similar group last year on that, and the experts agree that the Western Balkans have a great potential for renewable energy. You have rivers, you have sun, you have wind, so you can do it, but we still don't see any investment or any big investment in that. So maybe, you know, some comment
That is true. There is a need for power generation, renewable energy, indeed. But high voltage lines and cross-border high voltage and cross-border interconnectors are used to only 15% of available capacity. So the potential for trade cross-border is much, much bigger than currently used. And there is a policy reason for that. There are a couple of policy reasons, and it's quite good that civil society helped discovering these reasons. So enhancing the cross-border trade using existing infrastructure. So yes, both things apply, agree. But the right balance between these two is a serious policy question and need a participation of civil society to discover the right balance.
Thanks, excellent, excellent. I like what you said very much. So can we maybe a brief comment from you, Marko, on what was said now?
Yeah, I completely agree with Mr. Kovačević also about the maybe luxury of high-speed travel. I was fortunate enough to travel a couple of times from London to Edinburgh by that train. And it takes 5 or 6 hours, and it's a beautiful. I did the most beautiful reading and work that I did was on those journeys. So, kidding aside, from our perspective, whether you enhance the existing infrastructure or build new, from the perspective of planning infrastructure investment, it boils down to the same. You have the process of selecting, assessing project ideas, and then finding the ways of funding them. And what you said before about the lack, the main objection you have, as I understood, to our recommendations is that we don't mention anywhere the need to increase investments. However, what we were trying to illustrate is that the existing systems of planning, building, monitoring, reporting on infrastructure, even with these investments at this low level, are not functioning. This is not solved by increasing funds. We have to be more cautious about how we spend what we have right now. And another point when we were talking about critical infrastructure, about railroads, about ports, energy investments, the key issue for me there is related to state-owned enterprises, because most of these investments are actually delivered or given to SOEs to implement. For example, in Montenegro, the National Railroad Company is the one restructuring or building, reinvesting in the railroad network, and it has a big loan, and the state has guaranteed for it. However, when we ask them, and when we try to discover a little, even a detail about what's going on with this money, we have no idea, because state-owned enterprises in our countries are black boxes of the already very gray public sector, how they operate, how they spend these significant loans for which the country has, the state has guaranteed. That's a huge, huge issue. And just leaving this issue to them, to unreformed, wasteful, unproductive, bastions of party employment, bastions of misuse of public funds. So these are the actors to which we say, okay, make this 21st century railroad happen, or increase our energy production and stuff like that. So to me, or renovate our ports and airports. I mean, to me, that just simply doesn't go together. We need a stronger oversight from the state as the owner of these companies, and then from the CSOs, and for that, a precondition is more transparency and more. That's, I think, the best way to create demand from the CSOs to, first of all, increase the access to data. Without it, we are simply not on equal footing. We cannot talk to somebody who has all the information and we have none, and then we say, and he doesn't want to give it to us. So, and then what can we do? How can we meaningfully contribute?
Thanks. No, I agree fully with the transparency and participation part. What I'm just saying is that it's not the whole story. It's one part, but you have the part on regarding greater investment, and you also have the part that was mentioned about better use of current infrastructure. So I would like to see all these things there in the recommendations. But let's go. Yeah. Okay. No. Sure. Okay. I'm pretty sure we have many questions. Okay. Nedim, please, you want to say something? Okay. Let's go with the online panelists now. Nedim, please.
Sorry, because it was a transport, just to reflect some of the things. Yeah, I can just agree with the gentleman. Usage of current infrastructure, of course, is very important. But what we have in the region is maintenance backlog. So you have actually, for example, railways, which were designed for the speeds of 120, but because they were not maintained, they can now actually achieve the speeds of 30 or 40. Right, so it's not even, we are not talking about high speed, we are talking about something normal speed that you can actually drive from one capital to the other. I drove a couple of times from Belgrade to Sarajevo to Zagreb. It was a very pleasant experience, but very time-consuming experience. So also, I think where civil societies, in my opinion, should be actively involved in the part of the design, yes, but also in the part of customer satisfaction. So, because many times in the planning, we all know we need better infrastructure, it needs to be better used. But what is your opinion? What is actually not working? Where are the actual bottlenecks? What can be maybe quickly improved without big investments? And what is actually hurting? I can give an example of knowing exactly when your train is coming, is leaving. Do you have all the information available? Can you pay for them online? And those kind of things. So I think next to what we already discussed in the process of designing the infrastructure, I think civil society inclusion in the process of the customer satisfaction is also very important.
Thanks, excellent. Ari, did you want also to comment? Yeah, please.
First, let me say that Marko made the best argument for why IFC focuses so much on private sector, because it is true that, you know, when government institutions run poorly a business, well, they can continue doing it forever. When a private sector company runs a business, if they don't run it well, they go out of business. And that's the big difference. You know, public-private partnership are a great way to ensure that projects are not only environmental and socially sustainable, but they are also financially sustainable, and they will generate financial sustainability over the long term. I just wanted to highlight in response to Mr. Kovacevic that certainly, I mean, certainly we can make a better use of the public infrastructure in transportation, and by the way, improving the way our state-owned companies work is one of the key initiatives that could be taken there. But when it comes to, I mentioned the risks for the region not to urgently bridge its infrastructure gap. I mean, let's talk about digital infrastructure that will allow the new economy and people to seize the opportunity of the new economy. Renewable energy, of course, Marko mentioned it, but also waste management. That is an enormous toll on our environment in the region. Water treatment and wastewater treatment. Irrigation, I mean, I am also based in Belgrade, and in Vojvodina, maybe 3% of the land is irrigated, while we are facing completely new climate patterns as part of the risks that I mentioned, and we don't know the sustainability of the agriculture sector if it continues relying on rain patterns. Yes, I mean, there is a huge infrastructure gap if the region wants to get where it needs to be in 10 years from now. And that's not just transportation.
Thanks, Ari, excellent. Jovana, do you also want to briefly reflect on what was said so far?
Yes, just briefly, since I'm European Affairs Minister, I'm more focused, of course, on EU funds and how to better use it. But it's not just about the new infrastructure and new projects and better use of the EU funds. It's also, for example, the conditions in the railway network in Montenegro is one of the preconditions in the negotiations to improve it. And bearing in mind how much we invested in the railway network in Montenegro, and how the state of the whole network and conditions there, and this is really challenging how to use current infrastructure in the Western Balkans. So I'm always opting, you know, for the new one. And in that sense, I think that the civil society can also help in improving methodology and preparation and implementation of the EU projects and EU-funded projects. So in that sense, I think that there is also more space for the civil society to be more included. But as I said, to just repeat once again, I think that there is also need for the Marko mentioned the single pipeline project and the timeline for Montenegro. Since we are updating it regularly on 2-year basis, there's also space for inclusion of civil society. So maybe in the Ministry of European Affairs, we are investing so much time in order to better develop procedures, and then maybe we are neglecting lack of capacity in other institutions to deal with the EU funds and applications and implementation. So I think that we have to deal on many, let's say, paths and many activities we have to undertake.
Thanks, Jovana, excellent. Let's see if we have some other question or comment from the audience here. Okay, so please, would you be so nice? Yeah, great, excellent. I like this panel so far.
You want me with beer?
Of course.
And Alexander too.
Of course.
So just briefly.
It's free anyway.
Just briefly, I was inspired what was Marko saying at the beginning about the lack of data and about the way the government is picking strategic partners for the realization of strategic projects. So I think we're facing now a new level of a problem and of issue. I will take example of Serbia for this, because I think now we're going to legalization of this untransparent procedure, and in fact creating of parallel legal system. And I will give you example for that. 2 or 3 years ago, we have adopted the law that regulates critical infrastructure. So it was literally introduced by that law that the government has the right to choose strategic partner without concerning any other existing laws that regulates a competition, that regulates procedure, that regulates everything. Later on, the same was tried with the law on waters, the same was tried with the law on mining.
Sorry, this is for which country?
For Serbia.
Serbia, okay.
Yes,
we had something similar in Macedonia as well, but okay, please go on.
I know that region is facing the similar issue. This is why I'm saying I'm taking the example of Serbia because it's the closest to me, of course, but I know. So we are facing with legalization of this problem, and it creates parallel legal framework. So it allowed the governments to choose which way they want to go and which law they want to apply. And 2 major problems are exactly that, choosing strategic partner for realization of a project, and the other is announcing the project of strategic importance. And this is perfect excuse to not disclose the documents, to not explain everything to the interested public, to just go with the shady parts of the documents, etc., etc. So this is.
Yeah, thanks. Excellent. Yeah, fully.
If I can just briefly, I completely agree. I forgot to mention it before, and Ari also mentioned this fast-track procedure. So what we were talking before was the procedures for selection of projects for capital budgeting national, for the WBIF, but there's a third one in which a state may decide to build something and then adopt a completely new legal system for it. We had it in Montenegro for our highway project, which is built upon a special law on highway, which then regulates how it is done, it regulates the procedure, it regulates the public procurement process. So this was something that for example, the EU really didn't bother too much about. It wasn't really, I guess it's a legitimate right of a country to decide how it wants to do that, but it's not in accordance with standards. And and we may come to a situation where the smallest projects are under greater scrutiny in all the phases of the process, and then the biggest one, for example, highway is the biggest project in the 1,000 years of Montenegrin history, and it is done according to a special law, which has almost no procedure. It has a special procedures for bidders, for contractors, for public procurement process, and so on. So this is a problem that it has to be curbed somehow, because we can amend the legal framework and then the government just creates a new one when it finds a suitable donor for a project.
And this is the phenomena of rule by law instead of rule of law, because nothing is illegal. I mean, there is no corruption whatsoever, except that the law is not transparent. We have civil society. I've mentioned this example. Also, there are examples in Belgrade, the construction of the Belgrade metro, or strategic investors in Albania. I mean, the regions tend to contract infrastructure according to these laws. Coming to civil society, the governments, coming to the civil society, it means that it was mentioned the word donors for the civil society. It's a very nasty word, because those donors, they don't give anything, in the sense that it's not their money that they give, but it's the money of their own taxpayers. They just manage this money. This is the first thing. Second, this is the word donner, to give. They don't give. They ask for a service. The third point is that when they contract private contractors, they are not called donors anymore. They are called contracting parties. We also want to be contracting parties in the sense that we produce the same services for higher quality, better engagement, and what we have and the private contractors do not have is that we have skin in the game. Right? We will live with those roads, we will live with those water and waste, whatever facilities and everything. We will live in those countries. if we are using, and here I will stop, Marko said that kind of we are knocking on the door of the EU, but we do it not because the EU has the biggest problem. Actually, no, it's the contrary. It's because the EU allows us to do it. And by building up this partnership, we also get reinforced and we can be much more active and much more strong and have much more agency for those second pipelines or third actors that get strategic projects, etc., etc. It's a win-win situation.
Thanks, excellent. So we have like 3 more minutes to finish this panel. So let's try to go once again to the podium, to the audience. Is there someone who wants to ask or comment? Yes, Corey, please. Do you want to also come here?
I would just like, I think this panel was fascinating, but I would just want to emphasize a difference that I see between 2 things that have been mentioned that I think we have to keep in mind. One is the problem of the absence of development planning, vision, dialogue with the economy that by now has been built in a haphazard way. We were just privatizing whoever comes. Things happened. Now we should be asking ourselves, it's over from kind of recovering past resources. How can we use better the infrastructure that's there? Will we use it? And so on. And that's this development planning that the EU has tried to help us develop, at least in Serbia, that I myself was very involved with as when I was in the government last time in Serbia. And that everybody tried to develop top-down, and it hasn't gone anywhere. Another issue is what more of this conversation right now happened about was, well, once you know you're going to build a road, or you've selected more or less what you want to do, how you actually do it, under what kind of monitoring. And for some reason that gets confused, and it should not be confused. Building the civil society that we need on monitoring the choices is a good way, but ultimately what we need is, again, what I've been saying in these 2 days, is a civil society that can start mobilizing and asking the stakeholders of development what they need and informing them, since the government won't do that. So that would be building a demand for development planning bottom-up.
Thanks, excellent, excellent. I think we should stop now 1 minute before the planned time, but I think we don't have time to go with another round of final questions and comments. Thanks, Corey, thanks, Marko, thanks, Ardian, thanks, Nedim, thanks, Jovana, thanks, Ari, thanks everybody else from the podium. And yeah,
now beer.
Yeah, no, tonight. So I owe 3 beers, okay. Yeah, see you.
Cheers.